Hello, I'm Tom Szydlo, and welcome to the A-List. My guest on this edition is radio and TV legend Dick Kay. Over the last 50-plus years, Dick Kay has directed and discussed local, state, and international politics. Mr. Kay has won numerous awards over his career, starting out in radio and then moving to NBC5 Chicago, and recently retiring in 2006. Mr. Kay is now back on the radio in his show, Back on the Beat. Mr. Kay, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Tom.
All right. Now, tell me exactly, how did you get started in radio in the first place?
In college, I thought I was going to be a commercial artist. I soon discovered after about 2 years that I wasn't worth 2 cents as an artist. I was looking for something else to do, and one of my professors involved said, you should probably go take a look at speech. You seem to be a personable guy. It might do you some good. I went over and took a look at it. And I'd had some speech courses in college. One of the courses was radio speaking, and the professor used to take us over to a little radio station on Sunday, invited all the college students on Sunday. It was just extracurricular, and we'd go over and we'd actually run the radio station. It was a little daytime radio station. I thought, I kind of like this. And before I was out of college, because we went over there on Sunday, we generally knew what was going on at the station. I heard of an opening. I went over and auditioned, and they hired me. And so I worked part-time at that small radio station while I was still in college. And a bigger radio station opened in Peoria. And while I was still in school, I applied for that one to move from Pekin over to Peoria. And I got hired there. And I learned a lot there because I was full-time in radio, and I had to go to college part-time as a result till I got my degree. But that's how I got started, and I tell you, it was a great experience working in those 2 radio stations, especially the second one.
Well, specifically in those radio stations, what would you say would be one of your favorite moments?
Well, I don't, just in Pekin, Illinois, I mean, my favorite moment, my favorite memory has nothing to do with radio. It has to do with an announcer who preceded me, who was an alcoholic, and I had to get him carried out of there, and I had to take over the board before his shift was up. So that was the kind of small town radio station it was. But in Pekin, Illinois, in Peoria, Illinois, it was a good music station, much like what used to be WFMT here, WFMT, and we had a hard time getting ratings because that was the era of rock and roll. But the people I worked with, those are the great people I remember. Those are my great memories of the radio station in Peoria. I worked with guys who got me interested in news, and they were real pros at news. They had come out of Chicago. They had come out of Associated Press. They went on to do great things. And I worked with an announcer, program host there, used to be in Chicago, named Gus Chan. People probably remember him, if they remember, it's a long time ago. But he was Chan's Rio Rhythms. Here's a guy who was essentially an Asian, and he loved Latin music, and so he had a radio show here in Chicago on the old WMAQ radio. So those are my memories of that.
Well, speaking of WMAQ, you actually ended up going there for the majority of your career in radio and television. How did you actually get started in going to NBC5?
Well, what happened is I went to, in radio in Peoria, I had an opportunity to go to work for a TV station down there. They called me and asked me if I'd like to go to work for them. That was a tremendous experience for me because it was a news department that we set up. And we didn't have any people. There were just 4 of us, including news, weather, sports. And we had to process our own film, edit our own film, cover our own stories. So it was a remarkable experience that really gave me a great deal of experience for my next job. And because I had been doing that, because I was in Peoria in television, I got a job in Green Bay, Wisconsin, where I spent 3 years as a news director, a television news director. And I was a very young television news director, mind you. And I had a general manager willing to take chances, and we started a TV news department in Green Bay. But because I had had the prior experience, so after 3 years in Green Bay, we were an NBC affiliate, and I got to know a lot of the people at NBC News here in Chicago. So when I was ready to leave Green Bay, I called these folks, and they brought me down to Chicago as a summer writer. And the rest is sort of history. I stayed. I mean, I was a vacation relief writer, but we knew there was a good chance I would stay, and that's why I took the chance, came down, and I was there 38 years. So, you know,
an amazing long time.
Well, it was a good run. I loved it.
You loved the entire thing, you'd say?
I loved everything. I loved the whole experience because, you know, each step of the way I learned something. I learned something about television. I learned something about news gathering. I wasn't the greatest. I hadn't been trained in journalism. I was trained in speech. And I had to learn it the hard way by doing it. And except for the two guys at the first Peoria radio station, I didn't know anything, but they helped me along the way and helped me understand the business of news gathering and how important it was. I learned something all along the way. I think for me, I'm not the management type. If I had to pick one episode, although it was great, I would pick Green Bay. I just never got comfortable trying to run a news department and trying to, you know, be the guy that does the budgets and the schedules and a small operation. But I'd rather be friends with the guys than their boss.
Yeah, that seems like a much better job.
But I learned from all of it, every step of the way.
All right, now over your career, you've interviewed a lot of big names in just numerous industries, specifically politics, since that's what you've covered more.
Mostly politics.
What would you say would be some of your personal favorite interviews?
Richard Nixon. I did a half hour with him up in Green Bay.
Sounds like
that was really interesting. That was during the time of the Vietnam War, and he was running. He thought he might run against Lyndon Johnson, of course. Johnson decided not to run, but Nixon said he wouldn't call the president a liar and proceeded to call him a liar. But I think the current president, President Barack Obama, interesting. I covered him when he was in the Illinois legislature. I covered his run for Senate, and I covered at his speech in Boston, which really launched his national career, when he was running for the U.S. Senate, and he introduced John Kerry at that Boston convention. And I think that was, to me, a really great event. It was an opportunity to get to know him. I covered him all the way through his run for the Senate. I did not cover his run for the presidency because I retired just before he ran, but I've had him on numerous city desk programs I used to do. One of the last shows I did was with Barack Obama. And I think I've done interviews with nearly every president. I mean, you don't get a lot of time, but you get 5 or 10 minutes, and sometimes you get more. One of the great events was traveling to Israel and being able to go to the residence of Prime Minister Menachem Begin and talking with Mr. Begin at his residence. And there are all kinds of, I mean, it's just hard to pick one. So, but a lot of personalities.
After 51 years, I'd say it would be pretty difficult just to pick one
You know, people
moment.
ask me, what's your favorite story? I don't know. I don't know what my favorite story would be.
Sounds like it'd be difficult for you to even make a top 20.
It would. It would. I mean, there's so many. The campaign of Harold Washington, the election of Harold Washington, the death of Harold Washington, the campaign of Jane Byrne, Jane Byrne's defeat, Richard Daley's victory. I mean, the city council meeting when they picked Gene Sawyer. There's so many. And I wouldn't know where to start to try to single out one event. But it's been a great career.
It sounds like it has been a very great career.
Fun.
And now it's sort of kind of wrapping up in a nice little way on your radio show.
Well, this is the best part. They asked me if I wanted to do a radio show. They're a very progressive, liberal radio show, and that's me. And they asked me if I wanted to do one, and I said, what'll I talk about? And they said,
Exactly.
We don't care, even if you want to talk about a good chili recipe. You can talk about anything you want. So I said, I got to do this. I started with 2 hours. They gave me a third hour, and I've had a 3-hour radio show. And here's the difference. I have freedom to talk about what I want and the time to talk about it. In television, you're lucky if you get 2 minutes. In radio, and if it's your show and you're unrestricted, it's a great liberation.
It sounds like it would be one of the best jobs
it's
possible.
Great. It's probably one of the best, but it's a return to my roots, you know.
Would you say you like your new radio show preferred to your early days?
Oh yeah. when you're green, when you start out, you know, I was a country boy out of the South and had just come out of the Navy and gone to college, and I was, even though I was 21 or 20, no, I was about 22. I was so green. I mean, I still didn't pronounce words properly, and a lot of things I did wrong. And but I was just happy to have a job. I just really wanted a job, you know, and it turned out to be my career more than a job, a life's work.
Now, also, what would you say to kids our age or younger who want to get into radio and television? What advice would you give them?
Well, when I started in the business, you didn't have many choices. You had 3 networks. In Chicago, you had 4 stations with WGN, an independent. You didn't have a lot of radio stations because companies weren't allowed to own more than 7 radio stations and 5 TV stations. That was the maximum they could own under federal law. Opportunities were limited. Now there are just, I mean, how many channels are on cable? I mean, 500?
Hundreds, even thousands.
And there are 4 or 5 networks and independent stations all over the country. There's Clear Channel Radio, I believe, owns about 1,500 radio stations.
Wow.
Well, that's not a good thing, but so there's all kinds of opportunity. The gratitude is not the same. I think management makes it harder today. They really want some cheap labor, and they've cut salaries even of the pros, and they're trying to do the most with the least. If you're willing to persevere, if you're willing to really surrender a lot of your life to that profession, then go for it, because there's so many opportunities, so many stations, so many outlets. But it's a grind, and no one should consider it. I mean, people say it's glamorous. It's glamorous until you're out there on the expressway doing a traffic report in 20 degrees below zero with a blizzard, or until you're covering a tragedy like an airplane crash. I mean, and you're spending in the Caucasus in Iowa or New Hampshire, and you're working around the clock. That's not very glamorous, and no one should expect it to be. But there are opportunities, a lot of opportunities, if you're convinced that's what you want. And look, this is not just on-air jobs. If you really think you're a good producer and you really think you're a good writer, and my advice would be to go for it. But I will also tell you that if you want to be a writer, if you want to be in journalism, you need 2 things. You need a basic writing course, or maybe more. You need a lot of work in writing. You need history. You need politics. But above all, you need journalism. And if you're going to major in journalism, don't major in broadcasting. I mean, I used to take interns, and I wouldn't take an intern if they said, "Oh, I want to be a broadcaster." They said to me, "I want to be a reporter, I want to be a journalist, etc." That's who I'm looking for when I was picking interns.
All right.
It's my advice.
All right. Well, thank you for that, and thank you for joining us, of course, Mr.
Thank
K.
you.
And thank all of you for watching the A-List. For my guest, Dick K., I'm Tom Szydlo, and we hope to see you again soon.